NEPA no dey try oh.
You never see anything.
The day had started with such promise, the kind of morning when the sun stretched lazily over the Lego skyline and every thread of fabric seemed to shine with possibility. Esther, ever the perfectionist, had already laid out her vibrant selection of silks, chiffons, and lace across the studio table. Each material reflected her passion, every fold and seam whispering the promise of the masterpiece she intended to deliver to her client. Her fingers danced over threads, pulling the needle through fabric with precise rhythm, the sewing machine humming like an obedient cat, the bobbins spinning and shimmering like a tiny planet in orbit. It was the kind of morning that made her think she could conquer the world with her scissors, pins, and creative vision. Ben, on the other hand, had set up camp in the corner, his laptop a maze of multicolored wires, LEDs, and small circuit boards spread around him like a mad scientist's palette. His calm, sarcastic presence contrasted beautifully with Esther's dramatic flair. Where she saw threads, patterns, and beauty, he saw circuits, light, and endless possibilities for ingenuity. His fingers tapped rhythmically across wires and screens, testing connections, improvising little electrical fixes, and muttering occasional jokes about NEPA as though the electric company itself were a mischievous roommate hiding in the shadows. The first flicker of the day came like a warning, subtle but unmistakable. The sewing machine hummed, the LEDs blinked, and the light bulb above Esther's head shivered. NEPA, ever the unpredictable entity, had arrived uninvited. One moment, the studio was alive with the warm glow of electricity. The next, it was plunged into a dim, uneven darkness, broken only by the candle that Esther had lit just in case. Shadows leapt across the room, dramatic and theatrical, dancing over the folds of fabric as if mocking her painstaking precision. The golden thread she had been pulling refused to shine in the flickering light, making her squint and squirm in frustration, while Ben's little LEDs blinked valiantly, trying to fill the room with a semblance of power. The irony was delicious. Here was Esther, a goddess of fashion, draped in colorful fabrics, performing a delicate ballet of stitches and seams, and there was Ben, the tech wizard, a calm island of logic amidst chaos, connecting wires, adjusting voltages, and muttering about the absurdity of Nigerian electricity as though it were an art form in itself. The first candlelight cast a gentle glow over the fabrics, highlighting the silky shimmer of satin and the intricate patterns of lace, while Ben's tiny LEDs added a ghostly, almost cinematic touch, glinting against buttons and pins like mischievous fireflies. Esther's patience was tested almost immediately. A delicate seam, meticulously pinned and measured, threatened to unravel as the sewing machine jacked to a halt, lights flickering in protest. She cursed softly, melodramatically, as though the universe itself had conspired to disrupt her artistry. Ben, ever the calm observer, leaned over, wires in hand, and tapped the small generator he had rigged, adjusting a loose connection with a flourish of clever hands. The LEDs flickered back to life, casting an airy but functional light over her work. "I told you, NEPA doesn't know talent when it sees one," he quipped, a small smile tugging at his lips. Esther lolled her eyes, but a laugh escaped despite herself, the absurdity of the situation softening her frustration just enough to allow her to return to her work. The day's pattern quickly established itself. NEPA would mock them in waves, cutting power when they least expected it, testing patience, forcing improvisation. Every flicker, every blackout became an opportunity for problem solving, for quick thinking humor, and for the subtle growth of camaraderie between them. Esther found herself working under candlelight, her fingers tracing stitches with exaggerated care, shadows dancing like an audience over the fabric. The sheen of silk and the softness of chiffon were accentuated by the uneven glow, and she began to see beauty even in imperfection. Ben, meanwhile, orchestrated small miracles with LEDs, wires, and a generator that hummed like a loyal dog, turning the dark room into a stage where ingenuity and absurdity played side by side. One particularly dramatic blackout arrived just as Esther was attempting the most delicate part of her client's dress, a neckline adorned with tiny, painstakingly sewn beads. The sewing machine froze mid-stitch, leaving a small loop of thread dangling like a suspensive cliffhanger. Esther gasped, placing her hands dramatically on her face, the candlelight flickering across her expressive features. Ben, calm and slightly amused, lifted a small LED lamp and rigged it above the work area, casting a bright, focused light on the problem. The beads shimmered under the artificial glow, and Esther's tension broke into laughter at the ridiculousness of her predicament. If NEPA wanted to test my creativity, she thought, it was doing a very good job. The interruptions became increasingly absurd. At one point, Ben's makeshift generator coughed, sputtered, and died mid-idea, leaving only the candlelight to illuminate the chaos. Threads and pins lay scattered like tiny obstacles, fabric folds threatened to slip, and the room smelt faintly of burnt filament from Ben's overworked LEDs. Yet, in this fragile, precarious balance, moments of humor arose naturally. Esther flailed dramatically as she tried to keep her materials organized by candlelight. Ben juggled wires like a circus performer, and even the flickering shadows seemed to participate in the comedy of errors. Each problem sparked creative solutions. When the power went out during a particularly tense moment, Esther holding the scissors mid-cut, Ben holding a bundle of wires, the two improvised with flashlights, reflective foil, and additional LEDs. They rigged an entire perimeter of light around the workstation, transforming the small studio into a dazzling display of functional artistry. The threads glimmered like threads of magic, the fabrics reflected the scattered lights, and for a moment, the NEPA blackout seemed less like an enemy, but more like a mischievous muse inspiring them to push the boundaries of invention. Suspense and tension, however, never fully left. Every flicker of darkness, every cough of the generator, every minor misalignment in a seam kept hearts racing. Esther's dramatic gestures punctuated the tension, a hand to the forehead, a gasp, a flick of the wrist as she tried to coax the fabric into place. Ben's calm problem-solving, interspersed with subtle jokes about Nigerian electricity, created a rhythm, a dance between panic and ingenuity, drama and cleverness, chaos and order. Time itself seemed to bend under NEPA's influence. Minutes stretched to eternities when the power failed mid-task, and the impossibly precise seam that took an hour to prepare had to be redone by candlelight. Ben's eyes, trained for circuits and LEDs, adapted quickly, finding alternative paths to maintain functionality. He rigged temporary circuits, tapped spare wires into miniature lights, and even used reflective materials to amplify candlelight. Esther, in turn, adapted her workflow, carefully unrolling threads in segments, holding fabric at exact angles to catch the light, and laughing at the absurdity of sewing by candle and LED shadows. The humor was subtle but constant. Each blackout prompted exaggerated reactions, creative improvisations, and witty banter that was absorbed by the narrator into the flow of events. When a spool of thread tumbled to the floor like a rolling comet, or when the lace she had sewn for 30 minutes caught fire briefly from the candle's proximity, the tension immediately turned to laughter and problem-solving. Ben's calm ingenuity provided counterpoints to Esther's dramatic flair, their personalities reflected in the dance of light and shadow across the room. At one point, NEPA's timing reached an apex of absurdity. Just as Esther prepared to sew the final bead on the dress, the power died completely. Candlelight alone couldn't illuminate the tiny beadwork. Ben, thinking quickly, grabbed his smartphone, rigged it with foil for reflective illumination, and positioned it so that light shone exactly on the neckline. Esther squinted, muttered a humorous string of exclamations about the audacity of the situation, and carefully attached the bead. The tiny bead shimmered in the improvised light like a diamond, and in that moment, the two shared a quiet victory. The absurdity of NEPA's interference became a backdrop for triumph. The afternoon stretched into evening. The room smelled faintly of candle wax, burnt LEDs, and the rich texture of fabric. Shadows played along walls and tables, forming mischievous, sometimes dramatic silhouettes of the two unlikely collaborators. Each stitch and wire became a story of resilience, adaptability, and humor. Their personalities, Esther's dramatic intensity and Ben's calm cleverness, were painted across the studio in a flickering light. They adjusted, laughed, improvised, and persisted. Eventually, as night fell and the city outside hummed quietly with the intermittent low drone of generators and the occasional flicker of neon, NEPA relented. Lights returned in an almost ceremonious burst of illumination. The sewing machine whirred, LEDs glowed steadily, and the fabric sparkled in the restored light. Esther, exhausted but triumphant, held the dress up, admiring the near-perfect neckline, the intricate beadwork, and the subtle shimmer of layered fabrics. Ben looked over his handiwork with a modest smile, circuits and wires tidied, lights functioning flawlessly, a sense of victory in his calm demeanor. The room, once a stage of chaos, frustration, and humor, now radiated accomplishment.